Well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the Repeat the Bridge section 20 times to my modern worship song, Mr. Samuel David Camp. What is up?
Not too much, Daniel. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's definitely been a week for those of you that have kids or have had kids. That last stretch, like month and a half of the school year.
Yeah, we're feeling that a little bit, but it's not nearly as bad, I think, as you, because our oldest is only in school for like a few days a week, and it's half days, and so it's not quite as intense as like the full school schedule.
Yeah, it's definitely a grind, especially if you are not like 8 like my kids and you're an older person that has to go through that and have the energy. But hey, we're excited to have you guys join us. A lot of interesting stuff just sort of going on in culture. Kind of some like topical stories and things that have happened that I think are interesting because they speak to kind of bigger concerns for Christians in the church as far as sort of how do we navigate this culture, how do we impact this culture, how do we kind of create art and films and things that have an impact on that culture. So some interesting stuff to get into. So why don't we just do that? Why don't we kick things off like we always do with some cultural conversation? So the first story is kind of an interesting one that, again, we just self-plug our own website. We just dropped a story kind of on this. But Alan Richson, who is sort of most known, he's been in several things, started off in one of Sam's favorite shows of Smallville, and then kind of graduated to the Hunger Games, and he's been...
How did you know?
And he's been doing a bunch of stuff. But kind of most recently, most famous, he's in Amazon's Reacher show, which I don't know if you watch.
I didn't.
You might like.
Yeah, I probably would, but I haven't gotten around to it.
I know. I think my wife watched it, but again, he's Richard. He's a hulking big guy, so he kind of is. He has that the action hero role,
smashing down walls and beating
that
up
that
baddies.
is sort of when you have that body and those muscles, that's the kind of roles you get. But he is gonna.
I can empathize with that because those are the kind of roles that I get.
The ones that you have to keep turning down.
I know. Say no, it's just not for me.
But he is going to be showcasing kind of another side of his talents later this year, kind of acting in his first faith-based film called Ordinary Angels, based on some true events. And this movie's made by the same studio production company or creatives that did the recent Jesus Revolution, which was a big success. So they had a kind of their studio. Some of those people kind of have like a regular prayer call / just conversation with people involved in, the directors and actors and things. And so they just had one with him and kind of the director of this Ordinary Angels movies, which is kind of asking for, prayer and sharing like the vision for this film and what they hope to accomplish. And there's some interesting stuff in. Again, if you check out our the article that we have on thecollision.org, you can find a link and like watch the whole thing and hear kind of all of them share. But there was a couple of quotes that came out that I found interesting because I think they speak to kind of a wider issues that we can kind of get into. And kind of the one is sort of the importance in his mind of why Christians should support these films and how kind of that can lead to transforming kind of the industry of Hollywood, where he says kind of at the end of the call, he says, continue believing in these kind of film. The movement is real. I said after the success of Jesus Revolution, he had Hollywood execs kind of approaching him to help them as they kind of they've seen the success of faith-based films. They want to start making faith-based films. So he says it matters that these films get support. Other people in town watch this, and a groundswell takes place in Hollywood that changes things in a real, meaningful way. And then kind of at the end of the call, he sort of, shares it's not just about this, having the monetary success, where he says, people are hearing the name of Christ in movie theaters. If that's where the pulpit is for people who wouldn't normally step foot in church, then that's still a great way to have that conversation. So I thought we could get into that because he sort of, again, I don't want to put too much, this wasn't like his just in a conversation. So it's not like like his manifesto, his whole philosophy. And but I think it reflects a kind of a common way of thinking about faith-based films and how do we impact Hollywood.
Yeah.
And kind of, we got to support these and kind of change it from the inside. in that sense. And then maybe after we can also get into sort of that last comment about like the pulpit and the role of these films. But what are some of your, you sort of heard this interview or you're reading some of these quotes.
Yeah.
What are some of your takeaways from that?
I think there's sort of that maybe two-prong approach that faith-based films are taking. And I think, both are maybe valid, but how effective they are, I think, is sort of maybe more at the heart of the issue. So, like, making faith-based films and, like, being unapologetic about faith-based films, I think, is one thing, and they're typically terrible films, but because it's, like, message first, they continue to be, like, successful. And so it sort of is one of those, like, self-fulfilling prophecies, or, like, I don't know, snowball effects of you do a thing and, like, it ticks all the boxes. And we've talked about, like, faith-based films a lot, and, like, how, every time you review one, there's, like, a caveat, unfortunately. It's like, this was good for a faith-based film, or, like, there's some disclaimer that has to take place. And so I think there's that side of it, and then the other side, which is kind of trying to go into Hollywood and make faith-based films sort of from the inside out, or, like, within the Hollywood machine, whereas, like, maybe some of the stuff that was from, like, Sherwood or Angel Studios, that's sort of a parallel Hollywood, and they're making their faith-based stuff, whereas, he's looking at, like, trying to not infiltrate, but I guess infiltrate Hollywood and make these faith-based films just sort of as part of the Hollywood machine, just on very, like, crude parameters of, like, money. And so I was like, hey, if they make money, like, bigger studios are going to want to do that, put more money behind it, make them better, and make more money.
Because there's sort of two, there's sort of always been two, when it comes to sort of how do we best make a difference in Hollywood, like,
yeah,
there's always sort of been these two kind of tracks of, like, the one is just like, hey, we just make good, like, we're creative, like, we make good stuff, we put it in there, like, we kind of, we support what's good if we don't agree with, even if we agree with the message of a film but it's not good, like, we shouldn't necessarily, like, we should just affirm what's good. Where sort of the other side, which is sort of what seems like Richardson is kind of coming at it of, like, kind of maybe the question of, like, are Christians obligated to support every faith-based content, like, even if it's not good? Sort of with the mindset of, like, okay, this isn't necessarily a great, objectively good film, but, like, by helping it, kind of doing your duty and buying a ticket with your family, it makes it successful. And, like, Hollywood that doesn't care about faith-based stuff, but they care about money, is like, well, if that's successful, then maybe we should make more of these. And, like, you sort of almost trick or, like, force Hollywood's hand of, like, these are successful, we sort of done our duty to help them be successful, like, therefore, as you're thinking about what movies to make, like, kind of that, almost like a long game of, like, hey, even if it's bad, Christians should support this because we want this message in films. I do, like, this, the cynical part of me is sort of like, this is, we've seen this mindset a lot of, like, what Christians really need to do is support this thing, which happens to be the very thing that I'm out. So, like, that's sort of like what Kirk Cameron did with the book. Or, like, what we really need is to change Hollywood is the kind of film that I happen to have just made.
And you should go
buy, buy more than one ticket. So obviously, like, this cause.
He has a dog in the fight. Like,
but I don't think that takes away from, like, because that is a valid thing. Like, that.
Yeah, I think it is. I think the trouble with that is, to what end? Like, I think maybe the church kind of tells itself that narrative, but it's like, is anyone outside the church watching these? Like, at the end of the day, what you have is, I don't know, like a hymnal, maybe, or something. Like, it's like, you're not, like, this isn't, like, some great, like, evangelistic thing. Like, yes, it's available for everyone, but I mean, how, like, and I don't know, and maybe there are stories of people who came across, and I think it's good that they're out there, maybe, but it's like, I don't like don't kid yourself that like these movies are somehow like doing like the work of the church, like in Hollywood, I guess would be, because I think we like to think they are, but I don't think they're as effective as like promoters of them and like churches who want to support them think they are.
Yeah, because some of it just depends, like on, and we've talked about this before too, like how you measure success. Like the fact that it made lots of money because Christians sort of dutifully went.
Yeah.
Is that a success? Like yes, if you want that out there and you want that option, like maybe available for other people, and like or just Christians can be encouraged by that, or hey, there's a movie that's not trashy in the theater, so we can go. Like there's value in that, but like, is it successful as far as like actually shifting, Hollywood in any kind of way? Like I've almost thought like it's almost like there's like this house party of Hollywood, and like Christians are like uncomfortable because they're doing stuff that we don't want to do, or don't. So like we had our went like next door and like had the small, had our own party with like soda and stuff, and then it's like I feel like this approach like is almost trying to like get Hollywood to be like, you know what, like you can come in, like we have a room downstairs like around the corner, like we'll let you guys come and be in our house, but like you're not really part of what's going on. Like you're sort of doing it. Like we'll put your movies in theaters, but like there's sort of it's just sort of taking the subculture and like moving it under the umbrella of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Without necessarily contributing in any kind of meaningful way to Hollywood. Like it's still very much films that are aimed like sort of that faith-based template. It's
a niche market that like a bigger corporation can like, hey, well, that's a revenue stream. Like we can make films for this niche market and great, like I don't think Hollywood cares, like, but it's like, well, okay, if it's a proven way to make money, awesome. Like we'll incorporate it. And I wonder if there's maybe a sort of an analog to this would be like the publishing industry, because I know like aside from like B&H and like Lifeway, most of the other like Christian publishing houses are owned by non-Christian larger publishing houses. Like Random House owns like I think it's like Multnomah and some other places. Thomas Nelson I think is HarperCollins. And so it's like is this sort of like the like publishers essentially, because they're kind of doing the same thing. It's like they're putting out content, some of it's artistic, some of it's not, and it's just sort of like how to live kind of books. Some of it's fiction, and it's sort of the same thing I think with film studios, because it's like, I mean, does Warner Brothers care about making movies with with a Christian subtext? I don't know. Like I think they care about making movies that make money, and so it's like if this one makes money, great. I don't know that they're gonna like necessarily be changed by it, and they could be. Like it's not to say it's like one way is right and one way is wrong. I think we just kind of can get a little bit muddy on like the purposes.
Because maybe like the devil's advocate to like what this guy's saying is like, sort of what do you get by, this type of film? We support it even if it's not good, because it's sort of this duty that like we need more of these message, like we need more of that message.
Yeah.
Even if the film and like that becomes successful, then like sort of what the trouble with that approach has always been like, what's the incentive then to make anything else? Like it's like we know if we just sort of have that message, because Christians have developed this mindset of like, we don't really affirm what's good, like we just affirm what's like agreeable to us. That, like, as long as we if we focus more on that, then of like, as long as it's really very clear that like, very preachy and very like about the message, then like there's sort of this built-in audience that I don't know if that actually, like I think it might result in more films, and like I think there's value in that, but I don't know if it necessarily changes the dynamic as much as we think it does, as far as it's just sort of some of what we're already doing is sort of under the Hollywood umbrella, but it's not really a part of like what's going on in Hollywood as much as. So I don't know, maybe let us know what you guys thoughts. Or maybe one other thing too with the and I don't want to get too deep into it, but sort of the other part of that comment of like them being a pulpit.
Yeah.
Because that is something that did jump out to me. And again, I don't want to put too much stock on a guy speaking off the cuff on a prayer meeting, but I feel like that is both like the best and worst of faith-based films.
Yeah.
Like it sort of acknowledges the power of like, you know, these films can make a difference, but just the terminology of like, this is our pulpit. It's sort of the mindset of why so many films, faith-based films, tend to be so preachy and heavy-handed of like, this is our medium to preach to people. And if they won't come to our church to hear our sermons, then like they might come to the movie theater to hear our sermons.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I think in broader terms, maybe it's just like a misapplication of the arts. I wonder, like, if it's like, we understand like great works of art or like how art affects us and is useful in our lives. Like, I think people connect with certain songs, and it's like you go to that song for like solace or just to be comforted or for some sort of emotional release. Even if it's not like a Christian song necessarily, but it's a song that speaks to you, and you have that, and it's like it's special to you. You know, maybe there's movies you rewatch every year because it's like you get to go into this world that you wouldn't otherwise have access to, or paintings that you just admire. But yet, when it comes to like the church producing them, it sort of just throws everything that it knows about art, like kind of out the window, and says, well, let's make sure this message, like it just becomes a tool of like proselytizing. And it's like anything to do with like art and like the value of art and artistic expression kind of gets sidelined. And it's like, yeah, okay, but what about the message? Like, what about the what about the souls? You know,
the irony to be too is like, if we think of the films that like that we hate about Hollywood, it's the ones that like, this is Hollywood's pulpit to preach all their secular ideologies, and like it's all the message driven, like all the stuff that we sort of, the reason why we want faith-based films, because we don't like what Hollywood's doing, like, and some of it's just the morality, it's not just the approach. Like, I know there's maybe more complicated, but then like we sort of approach it by doing the same thing of like, you know, like if Hollywood, you know, if like a non-Christian were to like say some of these quotes about like, you know, this is sort of our pulpit for people that aren't going to be in the universities, you know, but we can preach our ideologies and like use this film as a tool to spread, like we would like be so repelled by that.
Yeah.
Like, but because our message is truth and we know like there's power in that and stuff, we sort of approach it like we do what we hate. Without recognizing that, like, you know, if we're repelled by this sort of heavy-handed messaging of Hollywood, like the other side probably feels the same as far as like, you know, hey, you know, it wasn't necessarily the fact that it was about faith as much as like I just felt like I was in a Bible study being preached at, rather than like compelled into the story. So again, I just thought that was interesting that he sort of used that word, but obviously a big conversation, and one I don't think there isn't like a right answer to. Like, I think it's sort of both. Like, even like the reviews that we do of like faith-based stuff, try and kind of balance that of like, you know, I do support this, I like the message, although I do think it's like you're not unchristian to critique things, and like we should. I don't think God's glorified by us just pushing a bunch of like amateur bad art in His name.
Yeah,
like, well, like you want good, and if you also want it out there, and you're sort of trying to ride the two of like sort of both, you know, making more, making them better, and kind of going up the ladder.
Well, and I do think like, and we'll get off this and maybe talk about something else, but like I do think this is becoming more and more of an issue as like these films get more traction, and I think especially like the show The Chosen, like are sort of showing that you can do this in a way that's like a little more nuanced and a lot less cheesy. And so I think that starts to open up doors for bigger and better production. But I just like, I don't think we should be okay with like subpar films just because like we like the message. Like, I think we should still hold, like, if it's going to be a faith-based film, like it needs to be a good, like, we can say it's not a good movie, but the message is good, and I think that needs to be okay. Like, I think we need to move in that direction, but if we will or not is yet to be seen.
Yeah, so who knows? But definitely as these become more popular, it's become more of like Christians need to think through this because it's not just sort of a niche thing we get now and then. It is very much a growing industry. But another thing that often causes people to have divisive opinions and kind of heated and sort of culture changing insights is the next segment of our show. We have Host Corner. So this is my week. I was a little disappointed that Sam did not bring some ginger beer like he promised last week. But kind of my week to share a little bit. And I thought to share again, kind of maybe move out of my metal realm, and just share sort of an author and artist that has sort of inspired me, that I've greatly enjoyed, and that is Makoto Fujimura. He's a Christian artist. He kind of works in New York, has a studio kind of right down, I think, from where like the Twin Towers used to be, and he was there when some of that happened. Just a fascinating guy. Makes great art, kind of maybe more abstract-y kind of stuff than a lot of Christian art is. Like, he doesn't necessarily like paint Bible scenes. He does things that, but when you kind of hear him explain some of the meaning behind it, I think it's a great entryway for Christians to be able to think maybe more broadly about, hey, Christian art can be more than just painting the Bible. There is sort of power in some of this more modern stuff that we tend to not like. But I share two of his books. Again, you can Google him to find his artwork. But two books that has influenced me in recent years. One, Art and Faith. If you're watching the video version, you can see the book. And then the one that he wrote, I think before that one, Culture Care. Both worth reading, especially Art and Faith is probably maybe a better entry point. And hey, even if you don't care about art, but you just sort of see the world and how aesthetic driven things are, encourage you guys check out that book. I think he might inspire you to think just deeper about the arts and the role of creativity in a way that goes beyond almost like the opposite of like what we were talking about is like art as a tool, art as this thing we use, and it kind of gets to more like artists, something that we are, and that's like deep into our theology. So I know even before the show, I was already getting Sam to check out this book, audiobook from the library. So I feel like I've already accomplished.
You've already done something. Yeah, so you're winning hearts and minds over here, unlike your metal host corners that I'll probably never check out, or maybe only slightly. So yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of this type of thing, and I'm sure I'll love the book. So I'm looking forward to reading those.
Yeah, and it is nice to like a lot of the stuff that you again, I read a lot of sort of these works. Like sometimes when you have Christian artists that are like writing about stuff, like they're writing it very much as just an artist, and they're not necessarily also like this guy's also sort of like an intellectual. Like he can kind of combine the two, where he can get deep into the theology, and it's not just sort of like fluffy. Yeah, we need art because it's beauty. Like he gets into it. Like
well, and I love the subtext of that of Art and Faith, which is the theology of making, and I really like that's kind of been a kick of mine recently. Is just this idea of being creative in making things or in producing things. I think in like because we are in a consumer culture, I think there can be great insight found and just I think joy found in actually making something, whether that's like just building a shelf or like creating a work of art or even producing your own food in some way. Like there's all these things that I think we used to do as a society that we're so disconnected from now. And I think, I think there are spiritual implications to that as well.
Yeah, because even some of the lingo we use, like the culture war language, or even like language we use here of like engage culture, like it's all sort of like almost like battle language. Like where a lot of what he kind of is helpful at reminding of us, like our initial like mandate on this planet was to make things, to grow things, to call, like not just like tear down and attack and engage, like. Although you still maybe do some of that, like that's also in the Bible in different places, but like at the foundation, like we're made to create and to like preserve beauty. And so again, check it out. Highly recommend it. And you'll probably read it and be like, hey, all those original ideas that Daniel's had through
aren't his.
Like, hey, he's just stealing from smarter people than he is.
Well, speaking of original ideas,
Speaking of original ideas, and hey, not all ideas necessarily are good ideas, but kind of another story that's been happening kind of in the last, when was Easter? We're a couple weeks out from Easter now.
yeah, two weeks ago.
But this aspect is still sort of unfolding, and kind of the conversation came a little bit after. And that is a kind of a viral Easter service, which it was quite the thing. Like this service was not your.
It was a theatrical release for sure.
Yeah, this is not just hey, it's Easter. Why don't we like read a poem before to like be a little different. This thing was a full-on performance, kind of Ransom. This church, this sort of big mega church.
Was this church in Texas by any chance?
Where's the?
I don't remember where it was, but I feel like this would be a church in Texas, and that's hugely stereotyping churches in Texas.
Which I don't think it is. I think this church. I can't remember.
Not.
Maybe our crew will be able to help us out with that. I don't think I wrote down the name of the church.
But, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
But this service again. The service itself wasn't put online, like the video. You can't go watch it. But like people had video. Like there's things have come out of like seeing like
there was leaked footage of audience
and, like,
members,
videos, and, like full like pyrotechnics, full drama. Like they're singing like Britney Spears song or Beyonce songs and like Kesha songs, and like I think changing some of the words, and like like some woman gets like crucified on stage, and like it's characters are all like looks like a Sam Smith thing of like they're all like in red, and there's flame, like they're like the demon characters, and like sort of like in lieu of their Oklahoma, we hear is where they're from.
Good to know.
So someone owes an apology to Texas.
Okay, I'm sorry, Texas.
But hey, adjacent, I think, to Texas. But sort of like kind of in lieu of just sort of a regular service, they know lots of people are going to come. They sort of went a very different way, and people have had thoughts about that. Kind of before the performance, this was kind of the explanation that I think they put up like on the screen to kind of get into like what their motivation for this is. It's a creative expression of the true story of the fall and redemption of man through Jesus as written in Scripture. Backstories and some characters or dialogue have been added. However, all biblical and historical context, along with any artistic imagination, are designed to support the truth and intention of Scriptures. And they kind of get into sort of, basically, this is based on the Bible, but like
loosely
some creative license on how we communicate that kind of, that message. And people have been kind of on both sides of the fence for this, as you might expect. Kind of you have the two camps, I guess. Like you have, hey, as the church, like we're not always the most creative. Like we sort of fall into these templates of like, like is about as creative as we sometimes get. Is like, do we play 3 songs or do we play 4 songs? Or like, do we like, do the prayer time after the first, like, like we sort of follow this, or this is sort of like, hey, like people are influenced by the arts, by performance, and like, why don't we present this in a way that's different from what they normally get? And like, especially because they kind of, and again, some of the comments that we didn't pull are quite I think at one point the pastor says something like, we're gonna push this right to the edge, like get as close to sin as we can without sinning, and it's like red flag. Yeah. But like, so there's some of that of just like maybe don't maybe I wish I hadn't heard that part of it, but kind of his their intention was like, this is sort of for the people that aren't Christians. Like this is people that just come, and this thing that will bring them in because it's different, and like we can communicate to them rather than just sort of us worshiping on our own. Like sort of, like I think he says like rather than us like as a team having like team practice, this is to like get people to sign up to be on the team before they play a game. Like I think that's like the metaphor that he used. So there's that side of it of like, hey, creativity is not a bad thing. Maybe this will be a way to like spread the gospel in a way that's unique. Kind of the other side of it is the like, oh boy, like is this, some of these like pictures of like a bunch of like grinding dancers with like flames dressed as demons, like to like, Beyonce songs. Like is this sort of how, the Apostle Paul envisioned the church? Like, is this sort of what the church should be? Like, should the church, is that our mission, is to like put on these big kind of spectacles, like, and like trying to make this like this big outreach rather than like the fact that we're worshiping in church. So I feel like the story itself is interesting, but it sort of also speaks to the wider thing of like, what is the role of the church? What is the role of these like outreach events? Like, are these a good thing, or like, are we trying to like add a lot of flash and lights and pizzazz to like draw people in rather than just like being the church and worshiping? Like, are you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably fall solidly on the be the church and like do the work of the church rather than like, the gospel is cool and all, but have you tried pyrotechnics? I think there's just this idea that I think anytime you start to feel like you need to sort of spice up the gospel in order to kind of get a crowd, that may be a bit of a slippery / dangerous slope to get on, and I think you probably end up doing like more harm than good, and because I think then it's just like, well, so is the point of church now to just kind of draw in as many non-believers as possible? Which, like, I mean, obviously there's the Great Commission, but that is for like the church body to do, not necessarily like the church like establishment is not necessarily like.
Yeah, the Great Commission is very much like
go,
like,
not
go do
like
this,
attract,
not like
yeah,
post a Facebook ad for like, not like draw them in,
right?
Although like we should do that. Like, I'm not opposed to like, like we should be mindful of like visitors and like people, but yeah, sort of that idea that like, just sort of our church worship, like the way we worship on a Sunday is like somehow not, is insufficient to like, it's not attractive to people. Like what we need is like to like add some pyro and like have people like descend from the ceiling.
Which I think is, I mean, that's sort of like, I feel like that's been around for at least as long as like the Western Church has been around, maybe like as long as America has been founded. I feel like there's always this urge to sort of add some sort of pizzazz to like the message of the gospel. It's like, it's great and all, but like I think we need like a giant slip and slide, or like I think we need to like have people repel from the ceiling, in order to get across the like, hey, like, yes, we're Christians, but we're also cool and hip and like we know what's happening. And so I just think it begins to strip the gospel of its power, because it's like I think what it tells people who would be coming, the alleged non-believer that's going to check out your pizzazz-filled service, I think it says that like we don't actually believe that the gospel is enough. Like when it comes down to the core of it, I think it's sort of like maybe you don't like express that directly, but I think the message that comes across is it's like we need to add something to the gospel to make it attractive. And I think what that says is you don't think the gospel is attractive on its own.
Yeah, because there's sort of like kind of two sides of that. Like where there's like the one, like we should be mindful of like how we communicate, and like there's definitely a role for being creative and like how you frame things. Like, I don't think we necessarily all have to just like solemnly stand there and like read a script of like read the creeds or something like that. Like, yeah, like we should be trying to present it in a way that's fresh and that is worshiping. But like you were saying, what is it about the way that we like worship not on Easter that we feel wouldn't be appealing enough? Like that people won't be drawn in if they just see us just worship like we normally do. Like that's not exciting. Like that's not, they're not going to want us. But like if they
it'll
see
be the
us,
first and last Sunday.
But if we got some strobe lights, like then make this sort of this big production. I think also some of it, and maybe this is like my host corner 1.5 or something like that. A side thing of like even just how we treat these services, like kind of my, I don't want to say pet peeve, that just makes me sound overly grumpy, but like is like for these big services, like because I think there is a role in like being in the arts and like trying to communicate, and part of the problem with like these ones, they become so over the top and it's so out of the norm. Like it's like normally we just sort of worship, but like when it's Easter, all of a sudden it's like we got videos and we got dancers and we got so much stuff and we got lights and like we're bussing in people from other churches to perform and like it's very much like this is our Super Bowl, like people might check out, but
which I'm sure if you'll dig on the internet, some pastor has said this is our Super Bowl.
Yeah, there probably is. As said some guy somewhere, because Easter and Christmas, and that's when a lot of visitors do come. But it's almost like this irony of like when we feel like this is like a really big event for us, like this is an important Sunday, like we pull all our artists and creatives and like we put a lot of thought into
there's a big push in the art
into like how creative we are, and like but then like the Sunday after Easter is sort of like musicians back to practice, but like people making videos and spoken word and all these other things, like back in the closet, like we'll see you at Christmas time, like
right.
So sort of like we fire all the bullets in like these big Sundays because we feel like that's going to be, we're going to impress people. Yeah. But we don't necessarily like throughout our year, like incorporate the creativity. Some of the stuff is just natural to like who we are as Christians.
So what you see then is a church that recognizes the power of art and simultaneously ignores the power of art the other 50 weeks of the year. So it's like Christmas and Easter. If we want to make an impact on the culture, we use art. But if like, except for those times, like we don't use art. So it's a really weird thing. It's like,
or at least art that's not music. Like, music kind of stays. But I get logistically, like, it's hard to like coordinate these big services. But like, even if we just spread that out, like hey, instead of having like everything
all
have
of
this big like production, like why don't we just have this guy do a spoken word on this Sunday, and like, hey, we'll bring this dance group or something, and like they'll like, and just sort of make that as like, hey, this is just sort of how we worship in a way that feels less gimmicky than like when it's this Sunday, like because then like, people come the next week and it's like, oh, this is very different than I experienced. Like
it's like, what happened to all the pyrotechnics? Like I thought I was coming.
Maybe the church down the road has more strobe lights. So
it's like you guys won me over with your fire and dancing, but you only have that one day of the year, like.
Because I do think that is some of why I feel like it's a little cringe. These like this viral. I mean, there's just what they're doing in a lot of ways is I find cringy. Like beyond the fact that it's just sort of how much of it. Like, some of that
the volume of stuff that's happening.
But I do feel like I like the understanding, like the philosophy of like being creative and how we do this and like allowing our creativity to like be a part of worship. I just wish that we had that same mindset like
throughout the year,
in October or something, like not just
I think that's a great challenge to churches is to say that like the thought and creativity that you put into like Easter and Christmas services, like just diffuse that over the whole year and see how that changes your worship service. I mean, I think that could be really powerful, and I think a lot more authentic to your congregation as well. I think if you're infusing your normal services with bits and pieces and using the artists that you have in your congregation to a greater effect, I think that could be a lot more powerful and have longer lasting implications than just like one big like firecracker that goes off once or twice a year.
Yeah, and I think also just trusting that, hey, worshiping God, there is power in that. We don't need to like pizzazz it. Like if we have to, then we should look to, hey, why is our worship not attractive to people? What's wrong there? But hey, let us know. If you guys all about the crazy pyrotechnics, dancing to Beyonce, crucifying some woman on stage, theatrics of some of these services? Is there a better way to do it, even if maybe some of the intention and the heart maybe is in the right place? Love to have that conversation. Maybe we can, as the church, we can kind of work through that and figure it out before Christmas comes, and we
hopefully
we have the sequel, part 2 of this performance. Kind of final thoughts. Again, we kind of deep dived on just sort of 2 stories this week. So we'll talk next week about some worship songs. And hey, why they all sound the same according to science. So that should be an interesting conversation.
Yes.
And I'm sure there'll just be other stuff kind of going on in culture. Any kind of final thoughts from your end?
No, I don't. I think I've all thought out.
You're thought out. We've wrung all the
It
thoughts
took
out.
all my thoughts to get to this point. So.
But I encourage you guys to thank you guys for joining us. Join us next week. Always a lot of this fun stuff to dig into, conversations, and it is, I think it is, even if we don't necessarily always there isn't clear answers. There's value in Christians just working through this stuff because it does matter. But thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for joining us. Hope you guys stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.